We got about a minute here. I got a couple of front end slides, Jim, and then I'll pass the baton to you.
Yeah, I've heard that before. An hour later, here's Jim.
No, I'm not that bad.
I
Well, good
know
morning,
you're not.
everyone, and thank you for joining us at the start of this new year for another IISE webinar focused on organizational excellence. And we're joined today. In fact, Jim is our lead-off speaker for the year. He's going to be talking to us more about insightful leadership, his new book, Surfing the Waves to Organizational Excellence. And we've set up sort of a series with Jim, and he talked a little bit about, he gave us an executive overview of his book back in September, and I'll reference that and give you some links to get a copy of that for. So what I've asked Jim to do this year is lead off and specifically zoom in on supply chain management. That's an area of specialty for Jim. So I want him to give us a sense of using his insightful leadership, what he sees ahead in the challenging year of 2023. So thanks to Jim for joining us today, and we're looking forward to sharing his thoughts with you. A couple of housekeeping things. We'll be sharing links with you as we go along in a presentation. We'll use the chat functionality, so you'll be able to see the links and get to the blog, get to the webinar, get to the recording, get to the slides themselves, and so forth. Please use the chat function if you have comments or questions to share. I'll be monitoring that as we go along, and I'll give you information about how to get a hold of Jim at the end of the session. We don't pull this. We haven't pulled off 100 webinars just Jim and I, or just myself. It takes a team of people doing it. So the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers is an affinity group in IISE, and they've been very active and involved. Tompkins Venture has been very generous with Jim's time and providing a number of timely and critical webinars for us. And then the Poirier Group, another example of a sponsor that has worked closely with IISE. I didn't mention Jim, but go back to the first slide. This is IISE's 75th anniversary.
Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I remember the 50th in Banff.
Yes, that was a great event.
So just to sort of kick off the 2023, I asked David Poirier, who is CEO of the Poirier Group, to identify some critical factors for success in what will probably live up to being a very challenging year. And now we're gonna hear from Jim specifically about supply chain. But these are the 6 things that David said. So obviously you win with people. So continuing to develop and invest your talent. Learn how to create more and more value faster for your clients, your customers. Control costs, reduce waste, improve productivity and quality. Reduce working capital, so improve your liquidity. You've got tough times, you got to have cash available to take advantage of opportunities. So find ways to improve working capital utilization faster and do it quickly. Build and grow your business process improvement capabilities. Invest in partners and talent development to ensure that you're improving not only what you do, but how you do it better and faster. And then finally, improve flow, reduce cycle times, lead time, find ways to get value to your customers faster and more efficiently. So that's sort of the context for what we're going to be talking about in the first quarter of 2023. So what we've done is we've zoomed in on supply chain, and I've asked Jim to lead off, as I mentioned. He'll be talking about his insightful leadership on supply chain management as he sees it in 2023. On the 13th, next Friday, we're going to zoom in even closer, and we're going to have a case study, PV Industries out of Canada. We're going to do a really, really cool case study that talks about the integration of information technology, people, process, and strategy. So I'm looking forward to working with Peter Hunter next week on that case study. And I think you'll see a lot of things that Jim talks about today manifest themselves in that case study. And then finally, on the 9th of February, we'll have Jared Frederici from the Poirier Group, Capstone, and talk a little bit about cutting edge ISE, integrated systems engineering principles and methods that can be applied to supply chain management 4.0 and 5.0. Back in September, I alluded to the fact that Jim shared with us an executive overview of his book, Insightful Leadership. If you go to Amazon, Google Insightful Leadership, it'll take you right to the site where you can get a copy of it. It's a great book, really love it. And his webinar was awesome. So Jim's been with us for 6 years now. And so when I said Jim's leadership series, it really is Jim's leadership series that he's providing for IISE for our members and customers, starting way back in October of 2016, and leading right up to September when he reviewed his book, and now today's webinar. So with that, Jim, it's not an hour, it's only about 5 minutes, and you got the baton. You tell me when you want me to move things, and I'll move along and keep slides going.
Well, thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for all IISE members for the work that you're doing on these webinars, a tremendous service and supporting of our institute and our profession. However, I'm not real sure I'm excited about this topic you've given me. This topic is a major challenge. And what I would prefer doing is this slide with any year but 2023, 22, 21, 2019, those are much easier to do. Or if you wanted to give me this subject, that would be fine, but it would be easier to do it 12 months from now. And so this is an interesting, demanding topic. And one of the reasons it's so demanding is because what we're going through with supply chain. And the supply chain is, the word evolving is unfair. It's exploding. In fact, in many ways, today's supply chain is not working. As soon as we think we have something fixed, something else breaks. And so it's continually getting more and more difficult. Almost every day you don't want to turn your computer on because it's going to be something else that is affecting what we're doing. And then lastly, what makes this difficult is the supply chain professionals themselves. There's an awful lot of supply chain professionals who don't understand the significance of what we're going through. Now, you and I, Scott, have been at this for a long time, and so we look back at history, but we're not able to find a time as difficult as today for supply chain for 3,200 years. Now, 3,200 years ago, there's a time that was as difficult as today, and we'll get back to that 3,200 year thing. But let me begin with discussing a few of our problems. So, Scott, give me one click on the slide. And this is a quote. Someone said, after 2 years of disruption, supply chains are almost back to normal. And I read that and I said, really? Who would be the idiot that would say that? And so give me another click, Scott. And where we found this came from is the Wall Street Journal in December of 2022. And you say, what the heck are they talking about? The supply chains are not almost back to normal. And so you read the article to find out what they're talking about. And they say the store shelves are full and widespread stockouts are largely absent. Well, I agree the shelves are full. And I agree that the stockouts, we can buy tomato soup, we can buy toilet paper. I mean, these things that were killing us a couple of years ago are largely absent. But what does that have to do with the supply chain working? I mean, you might as well say, Scott's wearing black shoes and therefore the supply chain is working. I don't understand what the connection is between shelf being full. In fact, the question I would want to ask is, are full shelves a good thing? Is that the goal, is to have full shelves? I mean, if that's the goal, this supply chain thing would be a lot easier. You just buy a bunch of stuff that no one wants to purchase from you, and your shelves will be full and stay full. You'll also be out of business. But if full shelves are the goal, let's redesign our supply chains to do that. But the first question I would ask is, what if you have too much inventory with low margins? So your shelves are full of stuff that have low margins, because when you have low margins and the stuff doesn't sell, what you got to do is you got to do a markdown. And if you have markdowns on low margin stuff, you're going to lose money. And so that's not going to keep the board happy or the CFO. Or what if you don't have enough inventory of your high margin items? I'm not mistaking us industrial engineers, our goal is to help our companies be profitable. And so having full shelves is not a gauge of profitability. What's the margin that we have on those products? And do we have enough high margin products on our shelves to allow us to be profitable? And then the third issue is, how am I doing with respect to my customer satisfaction and my customer service, and how customers are coming back to my website or coming back to my store? Do we have the items that they expect us, and can we make a profit on those? So I would conclude that full shelves has very little to do with us being successful in supply chain, and that instead of the goal being to have full shelves, the goal should be that we synchronize supply to demand and we minimize cost. And so that's one example of something that really bothers me. Another thing, another example, this was at a conference I was at in December, and the speaker that spoke before me at the conference had a CFO, and the CFO said in December 2022, my supply chain people are doing a great job this year. And so his approach then was to answer that question. How does he know that these people are doing a great job? And he said, quote, they have got transportation costs down, and in fact, they're below budget. Well, as you and I know, the cost of transportation in 2022 is drastically different than what it was in 2021. And so the questions I would want to ask is, what if the budget is based on last year's cost? And so if we look at the next point there, Scott, we see that question, and in fact, a whole range of questions. And so what we know for sure is ocean transportation is down. The cost of ocean transportation in 2022 is down 250% from 2021. We know that domestic transportation is down about 50%, the cost of 22 versus 21. And so if your budget for 2022 is based upon what we did in 2021, if what you're doing is meeting budget, you not only should be fired, you should be tarred and feathered and run out of town. I mean, my goodness sakes, the cost of transportation is drastically different than it was the year before. In 2021, the same CFO said those people in transportation are idiots. We've only gone through 5 months of 2021 and they're out of their annual budget. Well, then now we get to 2022 when the costs are down substantially, and they're saying, oh, well, they're doing a great job because they're under last year's budget. Or what if you really do have a reduction in the cost of transportation, but your on time in full is 30% than it was the prior year? And so what you have is your transportation cost is low, but the fact of the matter is your customer service is terrible. Or what if you are below budget because what you've done is you have taken the transportation cost and you've buried in the cost of acquisition. And so your shipping costs go to zero, but your acquisition costs go up. So if we look at your balance sheet, transportation is down, we're within budget, but guess what? Our cost of goods sold is way up and we're out of line. Or the last point, what if you are below budget by nearshoring? So you've looked at it and say, I need to nearshore, and that was a good idea. So you nearshored, but as a natural result of nearshoring is your transportation. Guess what? It costs less money to come from Mexico than it does from China. I mean, that's not a big surprise to anybody. And so our transportation costs are lower, but now we're paying much more for the item that we bought in Mexico than the item we bought in China. So are we really better off? And so looking at our supply chain people are doing a great job in 2022, and comparing it to a whole different world of 2021 simply doesn't make sense.
Hey, Jim,
and
I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
The OTIF, so on time in full. So I assume that's a pretty critical key performance indicator for distribution systems. Is that true?
It absolutely is true. Now, the problem is there's two definitions of on time in
Yeah.
full. One is a customer satisfaction perspective, and the other is the way Walmart punishes its customers for not delivering on time. I do not believe spanking your children or beating up a spouse is a good approach to collaboration. And so I am not in favor of OTIF penalties. I am in very much focused on us working from end to end of the supply chain to reduce, to increase on time in full.
Yeah.
Because if it's on time in full, that means we're taking variability and uncertainty out of the system. We know as we take uncertainty out, we're able to perform better. So
yeah,
yes,
100%. And Jim, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what Peter Hunter's going to talk about next week from PV Industries, working end to end, working with the suppliers to make sure that OTIF went up with their stores. That's a great point.
Well, it's absolutely critical, absolutely critical. And the interesting thing, Scott, is I listened to the points you made up front about David, about very challenging year. And my goodness sakes, I didn't see those before you flashed them up on the screen. But David and I are going to come very close to the same statements as well. So it appears that we've all coordinated these things, but we haven't. We just have been all living in the same crazy 2022. So it's been very, very, very difficult. So the good news, it says on the next slide, is that we've gained a lot of visibility. Everyone knows what supply chain is. I remember in March of 2020, my wife came into this office and sat down across the computer from me, and she looked, and I thought, oh, wow, my wife never comes in this office and sits down. She comes in several times a day when I'm working from home and says hi. She brings me a cup of coffee, but she never comes in and sits down. I thought, oh my goodness, is it garbage day? I forgot to bring the trash to the street. Did I forget to break down the Amazon boxes? What have I done wrong? And then she smiles, and I think, oh, I'm okay. And she says, congratulations. I said, well, thank you. I said, what do you give me congratulations for? And she says, well, you are now legitimate. I said, Mom and Dad never told me I wasn't legitimate. I've always thought I was legitimate. What do you mean I'm legitimate? And she said, well, Brownie's one of my wife's best girlfriends, just called me up and said, I was listening to TV and they're talking about supply chain. Isn't that what Jim does? And my wife says, yes. And she said, so cool. She said, I've known Jim for 30 years and I never really understood what he did. And my wife said, yes, that's Jim. That's what he does. And she said, oh, that is so exciting. She said, is it his fault we don't have toilet paper? And so right away, the good news is we have visibility, but the next point is the bad news is that visibility often results in, it does not result in increased understanding. So the next point there, Scott says, you know, if what the word supply chain is well known, but we're not really sure what it is or what the impact is. Now, we're not in supply chain trying to talk about, you know, stay-at-home dads or teenagers. We're trying to talk about business people. And the two slides I gave you is what the Wall Street Journal and what the CFO of a major corporation is saying. Oh my. Okay, so the good news is we have this visibility, but the worst news is we now are blamed for everything. You know, 5 years ago, when a CEO missed his quarterly forecast, he blamed it on the weather. Excuse me. Today, he's blaming it on supply chain. The reason that we didn't meet our quarterly profit goal is because of supply chain. Oh, what does that mean? That supply chain is some sort of an evil force that's trying to undercut the company? And so I think it's great we have visibility. That gives me a lot more opportunity to give speeches, but it's not necessarily because people understand anything better than we did before. And so what we find in supply chain is a really challenging world. And in fact, the objective function. And so we all have been trained to optimize some objective function, to maximize or minimize some activity. However, if you look at what supply chain has been through in the last 22 years, we see that it's changed what we're trying to accomplish. In 2000, what we were focusing on is the efficiency of the supply chain as in cost reduction. But starting in 2010, they said, oh, supply chain is not just adding cost, it's also providing customer satisfaction. And gee whiz, our customers now would like to get that product in 2 days' time instead of 7 days' time. And so in 2010, we said, wow, we have to look in our supply chain both at efficiency and effectiveness. And so all of us, industrial and systems engineers, are saying, yeah, right on. That's what we do, and that's what we want to have. But then it goes all the way to 2020. So you notice there's a 10-year gap, and now in 2020, what we got is recognition, that respect. But what I just pointed out, some of that recognition is good because it's positive. They're saying we need to do a better job on supply. But other respect we get is it's all your fault. You guys messed this thing up. If you supply chain guys would only get your act together, we would do a lot better job. So the respect we got has some pluses and minuses. But in 2022, only 2 years later, what we found is resilience. And what we understood is the world is in VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when you have complexity and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity, what you need is to have the ability to bounce. How can I continue to operate even though I'm getting beat up with respect to what my supply is, what my demand is, what my lead times are? It's a mess, but I'm still expected to be able to perform. But now we get to 2023 and there's a different goal. And this is to the point of David's first point on his of very challenging years. The most significant goal in supply chain in 2023 is retention of your talent, retention of your executives, of your middle managers, and of the operators doing the work. So it's from top to bottom. We can't be losing our staff. And so what we have is a real challenge because we have some supply chain executives out there that are working 80 hours a week, and then they're getting the stuffing beat out of them when they go to the board meeting. Why can't you idiots in supply chain get the right product in the store when we need it? Well, there's a lack of understanding there. And so it's a big, big, big issue in 2023, how we're going to retain our people. We want more productivity from our people, but we also want them to attend more meetings. I was talking to a CEO yesterday, and he said, I've just passed a request on to my entire executive team, say no to meetings. Say no to meeting. We're getting on the phone at 6 in the morning and we're going until 6 o'clock at night. And then from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock, we're writing up the notes and writing up the to-dos from the items we had. And no one's doing any work anymore. And so I think we need to be real careful with this retention topic. The future is not an extension of the past. Now, many of us have been saying this for 3 years. Another way of saying it is the next point that says we are not coming back to the way we were. We're not getting back to the old normal. The new normal is disruption. Now, I say that, and people shake their heads. Yes, a lot of disruption is going on. But then they go back to work and pretend it's like the day it was before. I think we need to look at this a little bit differently. If we look at the next point, we see where I think we were in 2019 is we assumed certainty. We created a marketing plan, a sales plan, a staffing plan, a budget, and we assumed it was going to happen according to that plan. And we assumed at the end of the year, we would have 95% of the revenue we thought and 95% of the cost we would have, and therefore we will do very well on our P&L, and therefore we can report to the board and to our stockholders, everything is normal, we're moving forward, and so we're going to assume certainty. We knew it wasn't going to be 100% accurate, and so we allowed 5% to have a little bit of wiggle room that we had to manage to that 5% uncertainty, but we assumed at least 95% of the time, what we had on our plan is what would happen. And the reason we did that is because that's what happened for the last 20 years. We came in and made budget and made budget and made budgets, and that's what we did. We make budget. But what happened starting in year 2000 is what we found is we had known uncertainty, where we know the numbers we've put forth are not right. And so this is a major change in our thinking. And so we, as an industrial and systems engineers, have to stop assuming certainty and realize that with certainty, we don't have a clue what's going to happen. We have known uncertainty, and that changes the way we play the game. That changes the job of the CEO. That changes the job of the chief supply chain officer. It's a different game. The pace of change, it says in the next point, used to be, is now 10 times what it was just 4 years ago. And so to stay ahead of the change, to stay ahead, to deal with this perpetual change, what we need to do is we need to have perpetual innovation. If what you do is you come up with an innovation to allow you to get better where your customer was 6 months ago, you're going to still be behind your customer, your competition, because your competition is continuously doing innovation as well. And so this is the greatest opportunity in the history of the world for innovation, because things are changing so rapidly. But it's also the greatest opportunity to mess a company up if you don't do that innovation. You cannot stay where you are. The level of disruption and the power and the cost of technology is demanding that we have continuous innovation. And so it's a different game than we played several years ago. I say on the next slide that the new normal is disruption. This will not pass. Disruption is where we are. And so what we need to do is we need to realize we need to be more proactive. We have to have capability that's more agile, more adaptable, and more resilient. Resilience is the ability to handle those disruptions, which are going to be coming more frequently. But that's not enough, being more proactive. We also need to be more pre-active. Now, what's pre-active? I'm not sure that's a word, but I don't care. I use lots of words that aren't words because they make sense to me. Being pre-active means that you're not going to wait for something to happen to respond. You're going to have insight into the future. That's what the book Insightful Leadership is about. What Insightful Leadership is about, it says, I need to understand where it's going, and then I need to get there before the competition does. It gives me a whole different view of what my job as an industrial and systems engineer is I have to get in front of next year and not try to solve this year's problems. If you solve this year's problems, you're not going to get ahead of the problems next year. And so we got to quit worried about what happened yesterday and start worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow and how are we going to get there. Since we have uncertainty, when we're trying to get to the future, we cannot do what you and I have been trained to do. Some people are going to be upset with me on this, and so we'll watch the participation, see how many fall off the participation meter at this point. But optimization is obsolete. Optimization is obsolete. Why? Because the objective functions that we have set forth are not accurate. We don't understand so we're trying to design this new warehouse. We're trying to design this new manufacturing facility. We're trying to design this new hospital, and we have an assumption of what's going to happen. And then we try to optimize for those requirements. And guess what? We can do that. You and I can do that. We've done that our whole career. But the requirements are going to change before you get to implementation. And therefore, what we need to do is not have optimization, but have optionization. Options. What are the options? What is the optionality that we can have? So we can operate well under this level, and this level. And in fact, I would suggest that the new optimal is optional. You have options to vary depending upon the circumstances, and that gives us the ability to handle disruption, to handle uncertainty. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to focus on. The new goal is not to be competitive, but the new goal is to be in front of the competition, to leap forward and to move and being ahead of where the competition is going to be, to get to that point before the competition even realizes you need that. So being pre-active is looking at the future and to get to the future before the competition. So what that tells us, if our goal is to get in front of where we are, is that continuous improvement is no longer adequate. Prior to 2020, if you had a 5%, 5 to 10% cost reduction, this first point says, you're able to have a great year. So if you can take 5 to 10% of your cost out of your operation, the boss gives you an award and everyone goes out and has a big lunch and everything's wonderful. Prior to 2020, if you had a major innovation every 5 to 10 years, that was marvelous. We're really doing well here. And so that's what we fell into the cycle. How can I take 5 to 10% of my cost out? How can I do some improvement in my customer service? And then every 5 or 10 years, we need to do some innovation. Well, I think that's backwards. I don't think that keeps up with the pace of the day, the pace of advancement, the pace of disruption, the pace of what our competition is doing. It's a whole different game. And so since 2021, we need to continuously deploy not cost reductions. We don't do continuous improvement. What we need to do is continuous innovation. Okay, and so we really have to turn it up. And so you have to do continuous innovation based on the insights of the future. Guess what? Our job just got awful hard. We no longer can sit back and look at what happened last month and try to make corrections for next month. We need to now start looking at what's going to happen next month and how can we correct it before we get there. And so instead of looking back, I'm looking forward. It's a different environment. One of the reasons this becomes so critical is the next slide is technology. The cost of technology today is lower than ever before. And the next point, it's because the power of technology is greater than ever before. We have the trifecta of technology. We have more processing power, we have greater bandwidth, and we have increased storage at lower cost. And so that says we can use technology to solve problems that previously we couldn't afford to do. And so technology is going to play a leading role in innovation. I was asked when I was giving a talk the other day, what's more important, the application of technology or the innovation that comes from it? And I said, is there a difference? The application of technology is what creates the innovations. So technology and innovation are bound. I mean, they're like my left arm or my right arm. Which arm is most important? Well, I need both. So I need to have technology and I need to have innovation.
Quick
And
question
so what,
for you, Jim.
sure.
Quick question. Sorry for the interruption. So when you think of technology, the way I think of technology today, I think of AI and I think of robots and that kind of stuff. But I also think about information technology enablement. Does that jive with the way you think about the word technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you've just stolen a point from my last point on this slide, and then and also we'll get on the other point you're going to make about automation and robotics at the same time. So it's the whole AI, ML, data science, digitization thing. It's the whole thing. So it's not just buying a new WMS or a new TMS or a new digital supply network. It's the entire thing. And how do we digitize to get this innovation in place that allows us to do something that none of our competition can do? So right on, good point, excellent point. There's a thing I saw, I think one of the big consulting firms did a study and they came back to the conclusion, if you want to increase your stock value of a public company, what you need to do is in the first paragraph of your annual report, you have to use the word either artificial intelligence or machine learning. And if you're in the first paragraph of the annual report, you have artificial intelligence, machine learning, and that your stock value will go up by 7% or more. Now, if you actually happen to do something with those words, it even goes up by more. But just putting it in the annual report, people think, oh, this company's doing cool things. And I kind of get offended by that. But I think their study probably was valid. Another thing that's going a major impact. And so these are all things that I'm certain about. See, the way I look at this thing, there's so much I'm uncertain about. And as I try to study what I'm uncertain about, all I do is get a headache and have to open another bottle of wine. But if instead of looking at what's uncertain, why don't I look at what I'm certain about? One of the things I'm certain about is technology. Another things I'm certain about is demographics. We can't change that. Guess what? Somebody that was born as baby boomer are now people that are looking at being retired. Baby boom was from 46 to 64. If you were born in 64, you're 58 years from now. 58 years now. 58 years old now. If you were born in 1957, you're 65 years old. And so what we find is baby boomers are retiring, but guess what? They're not retiring. Probably half the people on the phone are over 60. and we're working as well as we ever have. And in fact, I think I'm actually doing best work of my career right now. And I think it's really, really, really exciting because we have greater longevity, we have greater health, and so we are continuing to produce. That's a change. That's something we need to pay attention to. Generation X and the millennials are changing as well. They're much more entrepreneurial. They're more interested in self-fulfillment. They're really engaged in ESG and DII. If we're not doing environmental, social, and government things and diversity, equity, and inclusion things, we're going to miss out on a portion of the people we got to have to be successful. We need to address, what do the baby boomers want? What does Gen X want? What do the millennials want? And how can we retain those people by the things that we have in place? And so it's really important that when I mean, you know, David and I both said retaining your people and making sure you have great people is a major issue. Well, we need to look at who these people are. If you treat a baby boomer the same way you treat your millennial, you're going to be messing up because they're different people with different backgrounds, different paradigms. And so we need to understand that and work on that. And so I think it's important from a supply chain point of view that we keep our senior people, we keep our mid-level people, and we keep our junior people, and we allow that to grow. You know, every time you see a football team or a hockey team or a baseball team or somebody that goes out and gets all the latest, the best players from the last year, they never successful. To be a successful team, you need some senior citizens, you need some mid-range people, and you need some rookies. You need to have that mix, and then you need to know how to blend them together. If we look at the whole employment picture, what a mess. I mean, what a mess. We've had the Great Reset, where the Great Reset says, I want to work from home. I want to have a balanced life. I care about culture and trust and loyalty and healthcare and well-being. I'm interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there's a real issue there. Unfortunately, we weren't meeting needs of a lot of people, and we had the Great Resignation. We said, you must return to work. You must be in work at least 4 days a week. You must do this, you must do that. And people said, no, I'm going to walk. And they were able to find other work if they were so interested. And so I think what's kind of different today is, instead of job security, much more important is lifelong learning and job adaptability. I'm not doing today what I did for the last 50 years of my life. Why? Because the times have changed. And so I've done the Great Resignation myself, and I've adapted to a new future. And so what we need to do is help our employees become more lifetime learners, learn new tricks, and then be more adaptable. We also need to look at this fixed cost versus variable cost thing. There's a really interesting challenge when we look particularly at retailers or people that service the market, which has this high Christmas peak. How do we run that business? You know, should we be using full-time employees all year long? Well, until about 2 years ago, there was a strong trend to using gig workers. But now we know the federal government is coming down very hard on people, which, next point, are taking full-timers and trying to use independent contractors. And what the government is saying is, no, you can't use independent contractors, because all you're really trying to do is avoid Social Security, insurance, paying for vacations, and so forth. And so that's a sham. And so they're coming in and saying those gig workers are no longer allowed if they're independent contractors. They have to be employees. Now, the question is, do they need to be employees of your company, or can they be employees of another company that's selling you that service? I recently accepted the position as chairman of a company called Task for Pros. And Task for Pros, what we do is we have employees that work for us that we are selling on a short-term basis to companies so that they can balance out their work requirements over time. And so they need, for the entire year, 30 employees in their warehouse, but over this 2-month period, they need 50 employees. Well, guess what? We can provide them an extra 20. And so they have 30 employees that are full-time, regular employees, and now we bring in our employees for the extra variable cost to allow them to balance their needs of peaking and doing it in a way that's cost effective, that won't result in them getting in trouble with the independent contractor rules, which are now being enforced quite rigorously. And so it is really important that we look at the top of the organization, and we also look at the bottom of the organization. I mentioned here the circular economy because there's a lot of things in common that existed 3,200 years ago. The circular economy is, I call it the re-economy because it's talking about reuse, refurbish, recycle, repair, reduce, and so forth. So it's all the re's that are there. And originally was driven by environmental and sustainability laws or rules or goals. But now what we're seeing, it has much more applicability. What happened 3,200 years ago? Well, that was the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age took place from about 1600 BC to 1200 BC. So I took 1200 and added 2020, and that's how I got 3,200 years, as I mentioned on the first slide. And what we saw between 1600 BC and 1200 BC is we saw a globalization of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. Greece, Egypt, Italy, Afghanistan, Iran built an economy that says, let's buy the products from the lowest cost country, and let's then provide for that interconnectedness of the economy. And we can see how the economy grew and how using low-cost providers for different commodities allowed them to thrive. And the Bronze Age was a time when there was tremendous growth in economics, in standard of living, and so forth. Then sometime around 1200 BC, there was a famine and an earthquake, and there were some plagues that impacted that area. And what happened is people left the globalization view of that time in the world and went to every country doing its own thing. And what happened then is the supply chains in the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed. Now, how can we know what took place back then? Because we're now discovering ships in the Mediterranean Sea that had bronze from Iran, had copper from Afghanistan, had zinc from Greek, and it had fabric from Iran. And so you could see in the cargo of what's underwater and has been underwater for the last 3,200 years, you can actually see the interconnectivity that because of earthquakes and a famine and some plagues, what we saw is that this continued. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the washwater. We don't wind up with a Bronze Age ending in 2023 because we have rejected globalization. And so globalization is something that does make a lot of sense. Moving production closer to consumption. There was a big study done, 1,000 people were asked a question, there's 1,000 CEOs were asked a question, do you think we should move production closer to consumption? 94% of the people said yes. The question I get from that is, what happened to the other 6? What were they thinking, or did they skip the question? Because, I mean, the answer to this question is absolutely yes. Now, unfortunately, what our politicians in Washington, D.C. want to talk about is onshoring or reshoring. First of all, let me be clear, reshoring is a dumb idea. Reshoring, as we said in the circular slide, means redoing. And so reshore means you're going to bring stuff that you offshored back to the same factory with the same workers, with the same machines. That doesn't make any sense. That factory has been turned into a condominium, or it's been torn down and they built a new condominium. Or those employees don't want to work for that kind of labor anymore. And so reshoring is a uniquely stupid idea. Now, there is some potential for onshoring. And what onshoring says is I'm not going to bring back what I had before, but I'm going to bring back a whole different version, and I'm going to automate it. And if I automate it and I use robotics and I really create a digital factory, onshoring makes sense. But don't confuse onshoring with reshoring. Onshoring makes sense when it is viable. Reshoring is stupid always. A number one factor here is the topic of nearshoring. The goal is to get production closer to consumption, not necessarily inside the same country, but to nearshore. And certainly obvious nearshore to the United States is Mexico. The reality is Mexico is a great place to nearshore from. However, their costs have gone up and they're about out of capacity. So we need to look at other alternatives. Certainly a long-term capability that we want to develop is Africa, but more direct is Brazil. And how about the Dominican Republic? I was with the vice president of the Dominican Republic the second week of December, and you wouldn't believe what a brilliant lady we had. By the way, the vice president of the Dominican Republic, her son is an industrial engineer, so I love that. But she really understands the need for nearshoring from Dominican Republic, where Dominican Republic's in the center of where East makes West and North meets South. Dominican Republic is the Singapore of the Western Hemisphere. And so there's huge opportunity to do nearshoring through Dominican Republic, Brazil, Mexico, and other countries. So it's a huge opportunity. There's friendly shoring or friend shoring. And what that says, get out of China, get out of Russia, get out of North Korea, get out of Afghanistan. And that's something that, we've kind of had some blips and bads, but with the trade issue, that's something that today is becoming mandatory, is that we don't do trade with other countries that are not friendly to us, because in the long run that's going to create a problem. And so what we're thinking is, let's the whole globalization thing is, what can we do to increase the potential of Western Hemisphere? Of those 94% that said yes, we want to move production closer to consumption, 85% of those 85% of that said yes, and I want to do it in the Western Hemisphere. So we got to start thinking about what's going to happen in the Western Hemisphere. The next slide talks about the digitization of supply chain, and in fact, it obsoletes the term chain. As Scott pointed out up front, I've been doing supply chain for, 50 years. I was doing supply chain 20 years before we had the term supply chain. I used to call it logistics or distribution. But the reality is we still need a real focus on the network. It is not about one up and one down. It's not about the guy that supplies you and the guy you sell to. It's from the guy that sells to 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 the guy that sells to, that is your downline, and then your upline, people you sell to and who they sell to. And it's the end to end that we need to be looking at. It is not a chain. It's not links connecting. It's when the first component of the network does something, everyone in the network in real time has the same understanding of what's happening. It's when we're not looking at separate functions. This is my planning group, and this is my execution group. But what we have is planning execution. That's one word. I'm not saying planning and execution. I'm saying planning execution. It's one function. That's a closed loop process that plan, execute, plan, execute, plan. And someone says, well, how often should you go around that circle? I think 3 or 4 times a minute probably makes pretty good sense for most supply chains today. We really need to accelerate that process. We need to eliminate latency. We really need to have real-time information. And I think on this point, I have a typo, so Scott's not pushing the button. He doesn't want me to be embarrassed that I couldn't spell the word real right. But my bad, I proofed it and I didn't catch it. And so this is about real-time information, where from end to end in the network, there is the next point, a single version of the truth, where we have AI and ML that enables the autonomous resolution of most disruptions, where we don't physically get involved with the individual things, and where our objective is the true synchronization, the last point there, of synchronization of the supply to demand while providing great customer satisfaction. So what was I doing in the Dominican Republic? We're helping them develop a center of excellence to become the Singapore of the Western environment. And the first step there is to create a digital supply network that controls all ships, all planes, all trucks, all modes of transportation across the entire Western Hemisphere. And so that's what we're doing, and that's exciting. And that is, in fact, a digital supply network. A couple other just quick things I want to make sure we include here, because they're really important. The topic of unichannel, some people like the term omnichannel. I don't like that. I like the concept more of a unified channel, where what we're talking about is online and in store. we're talking about delivery, we're talking about pickup, we're talking about Pudu, pick up and drop off. And when we get to the next point after the next, when we talk about drones, I'm going to come back on Pudu a little bit. But we need distributed logistics where we need the product to be closer to the consumer. And so we could deliver to them quickly and inexpensively. And so that requires us to look at a variety of different types of facilities. We need to look at robotics and drones. Drones have been limited in the United States by the federal government. They're getting out of our way next July. And so we're just 5 months away from being free. And if we take the capability of drones and the capability of Pudu, pick up and drop off platforms, I mean, the concept of having a drone land in your backyard doesn't make sense. I mean, how are you going to return that drone? I'm going to steal one, put one in my garage, I think. Or how you're going to have a drone that drops a parachute over your house and you hope it floats down and lands in the right place? Doesn't make sense. That's ridiculous. And so what we need is landing platforms. And those landing platforms, which we call Pudu in Europe, pick up and drop off, are going to be great opportunities that drones without the single, without human being line of sight, we're not going to go there. These things are safer than the automobiles. I mean, my goodness sakes alive. Pudu hasn't hurt anybody. And so let's get the drones delivering to these pickup and drop off sessions. And then we need to really look at the functionality of our facilities. We need a DCFCRCLC, that's a distribution center, a fulfillment center, a return center, and a liquidation center, all in the same facility. We shouldn't be separating those things. And then we need to do them as full DCFCRCLCs, but we also need to do mini versions, which are small fulfillment centers closer to the customer. We need to do micro facilities, which are in the back room of stores for limited SKUs. And then we need to do these nano facilities, which are literally in the back of containers. And we can take a container and park it in a neighborhood, and it acts as a distribution point that's kind of like a big vending machine. And it delivers directly to the consumer right in their neighborhoods. Very interesting technology advancements going on here. From a leadership point of view, we need to focus on the future. We got to stop solving today's problems and start solving tomorrow's problem. When we're solving today's problems, by the time we put the solution in, it's already tomorrow, and so they're too late. And so we really need to speed up and look at the future. We need to be innovative. Lots of discussion there. We need to have collaboration. Now, a lot of people do cooperation, but not collaboration. Cooperation means Scott and I are going to work together to have some, and Scott's going to make some accommodations. I'm going to make some accommodations so we can accomplish the overall good. That's cooperation. Collaboration says Scott and I are going to work together. We're going to co-create a solution. So it's not Scott giving up his land and me giving up my land. What we're going to do is together, we're going to do a win-win and really collaborate. We really need to focus on moving beyond cooperation and getting into collaboration. We got to understand where we fit on what I call the DIKW, which is data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. You know, once upon a time, I was a young graduate from Purdue and I had some data. Well, I worked and learned some stuff, and I got some information, and I became an information. It was cool. But then I worked for about 20 years and 30 years, and then I got some knowledge, and now I'm a grandpa. Okay, work more than 40 years, and you work more than 40 years, you become a grandpa. That means you have wisdom. Okay, we need to work on where we are. And what we need to do is where we increase value to the organization is when we move to the right there. And so, yeah, we all got data and information. Many of us have knowledge, not too many of us have wisdom. And so we really need to work on how we can become the grandparents professionally and impart wisdom. That could be a whole nother speech we give, talking about how do you move from a data person to an information person to a knowledge person to a wisdom people. And guess what? We're all everything. I'm in some areas, I'm a data guy. Some places I have information, some places I have knowledge, and some places I have wisdom. And so I need to understand where I am on that scale so I can understand how to best deploy myself. And then lastly, we got to invest in growth. And that goes right back to David's point as well. Number one, investment in and growth is with people. Number two is with technology. So I see I'm running out of time, so I'm going to cover the next slide quickly, because the next slide kind of says, oh my goodness, everything we just got done talking about, we have to do in the context of inflation, recession, labor, semiconductors, Russia, Ukraine, China, and Taiwan. And then what we need to do is we need to do supply chain in the context of those things. And so it's not just technology, it's not just globalization that's resulting in this new normal being disruption. It's the world is in a disruptive environment. And so this is going to continue as long as we have complex supply chains and great technology opportunities. And so this is the time for us to flourish. We should not let inflation, recession, labor, semiconductors, Russia, Ukraine, and China and Taiwan deter us from doing our job of having great supply chains. So my last slide says in conclusion, and so first, it ain't your grandfather's supply chain. Now, that's that's the old phrase. I don't know who invented it, but we've known it's not your grandfather's something or other forever. But I'm here to report it's not only not your grandfather's supply chain, it's not your father's supply chain. In fact, it's not even your brother's supply, your older brother who's 3 years older than you. Your older brother who's 3 years older than you, his supply chain is different than ours is today. And so what we need to do is understand what has happened over the last 3 years and respond to that. Supply chain is very, very challenging profession. Some of you should probably get out of it because you don't have the fortitude to hang because you're going to take some hits. You're not going to have it right, and you're going to have a lot of misunderstanding in your organization. However, for those who step forward and those who be successful, although those are going to be rare, it's going to be a tremendous success story and lots of opportunity to make big, big, big changes and really get with the program and create continuous innovation. So I think the keys to 2023 to be a survivor in supply chain, first of all, retention. You got to keep your people, and that's from the top to bottom of your organization. You got to get with the program that we don't really know. And we got to be comfortable dealing with knowing that we're dealing with uncertainty. We have to be proactive. We have to have insight about the future, and then we got to get in front of it. We need not to look at continuous improvement. That's too slow. We need continuous innovation. We always got to be next, next, next. It's not doing innovation, wait 5 years. It's okay, we've done this one, now what, now what, now what? Because the game keeps getting accelerated. Technology, we really got to get up to speed and make something happen. And then we got to be very careful at understanding the shift to globalization and how are we going to do that? How are we going to automate onshore? How are we going to move near shore? How are we going to do friendly shore? How are we going to do Western Hemisphere? And how are we going to leverage some of the tools out there like Indonesia, like Vietnam, like Africa that can contribute to what we're doing? So, Scott, sorry I ran about 5 minutes over, but we still got time for questions at the end if anyone would like.
Yeah, no, Jim, that was awesome. And so I got a number of people chimed in on this. I'd really like to invite you to continue to do this series for us, maybe once a quarter, and people are clamoring for you to do the data to information to knowledge to wisdom talk. Can we book that?
Yeah, my fees keep going up, Scott. I think I'm already up to zero.
Yeah.
So can we double my fee?
We can double it. We can double it.
Well, that's the winner. And as long as you produce a quality audience of industrial and systems engineer, I'd be happy to do it.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. So here's the links to Jim's book. You can go to the quickest direction is just go to Amazon and type in Insightful Leadership, and you'll find it. Faith has been doing a good job of providing you with links to get to the material, the recording, the webinars. Jim teed up the next session is with Peter Hunter, who is Director of Training and Development and Organizational Change for PV Industries. They're a really interesting company in Canada. They're sort of an Ace Hardware rural farm supply company, 180 stores across Canada. And we worked with them for over a couple of years and helped them in their, I would call it integration and transformation process. Peter will be our presenter next week. And many of the things, Jim, you talked about, this case study is going to, give people just really hands-on, pragmatic, practical examples of this organization doing many of the things that you shared with us today. So I'm really excited that these two things are working together. And then on the 13th, I said the 13th of January. It's not correct. It's the 9th of February. Jared will be with us, and he'll be, I would say, zooming in a little bit more on principles and methods of industrial and systems engineers that can do some of the things that Jim talked about today. So a little bit more specific in terms of what do we actually do when we get inside a warehouse? What's it look like? What do we, how is 2023 going to be different in terms of supply chain management from a warehouse standpoint? So I look forward to that. We've got a survey for you. We'd appreciate you giving us some feedback. Jim, once again, fantastic job. Loved it. It was a great job, and look forward to having you back in a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months, and do your data, information, knowledge, and wisdom for us. That'll be great.
Amen. Love to. Thanks,
Hey,
Scott.
and your Boilermakers snuck past the Buckeyes last night. You see that?
I saw that 2 points, 71-69. I apologize, Scott.
Okay, well, it was almost like that missed field goal in the Peach Bowl game that we did.
Yeah, well, Purdue lost by more in the bowl game than a missed field goal at the end. So yeah.
I saw that. Jim, thanks again. Everybody, thank you, and stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.